Hello again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to A Princess in Exile, which I first presented at a meeting of the Autism Society of Maryland, and again a few weeks later by request at a meeting of People on the Go of Maryland, which is an advocacy group for people with all kinds of disabilities, not just autism. Both meetings were held by Zoom, but I did not use the Zoom record feature because I wanted to protect the identities of people in the audience. Instead, I attempted to record the presentation by setting up my cell phone camera off to one side. But both times, phone calls came in, which stopped the recording because iPhones can't multitask that way. So, because some people either joined the meeting late or weren't able to attend at all, for their benefits, I'm recording this again, offline this time, so I can finally capture the entire speech. Also, in a prior meeting, I observed that some of the members needed an explanation of certain words. So, in the interest of accessibility, and because I tend to use very vivid language, I've provided a handy glossary of possibly unfamiliar terms, which is in the description below this video. Terms like old school, nouveau riche, and my personal favorite, which I coined myself, delusions of grande dame. So sit back and enjoy A Princess in Exile.
So I'll go ahead and start off here. Rosanna Tufts earned a Master of Music degree from Peabody, worked as a church secretary, had a career in human resources at CCBC. She produced an original rock opera, produced a talk radio show, wrote a book, learned to sew, was ordained as an interfaith minister, became a Toastmaster, astrologer, and Reiki practitioner, was married twice, raised one child, survived a stage 4 cancer, all without knowing that she was autistic. And her discovery of this is at age 64 led her to produce the documentary Was It All Autism All Along, which is available on YouTube, and she has also put a link for that in the chat as well. So thank you so much, Rosanna, again for coming. Again, friendly reminder to everyone to please put yourselves on mute while she is presenting and hold all the questions and comments to the end. And I will turn it on over to you, Rosanna. Take it away.
Thank you for having me, ladies and gentlemen. My very recent autism diagnosis began in response to something a friend said to me earlier last year, and when I went down the rabbit hole on it, I realized, holy smokes, he's right. Well, I wasn't thinking, good gods, my entire life has been a lie. There were so many things about my life that had never made sense before, but suddenly started making sense. Maybe it takes one to know one? You have to know what to look for. But today, I'm not going to rehash the list of autism traits and how I measure up to them. You can watch my documentary for that, because that's what it's for. It's already posted in the chat. And I'm presuming that a decent percentage of you here already know what the autism traits are. Instead, I'm going to riff on a question that our moderator asked me in the adult autism group a couple of months ago. I was talking about how one of my ancestors invented the passenger elevator, and another ancestor invented the valve to regulate the flow of ether in the very first surgery done under what we would call modern anesthesia. And he asked me, "Are you descended from royalty?" Probably meant it as a joke, but I'm answering it seriously. Almost, yes. It's partly why I'm so well dressed in spite of my disability. I sometimes like to joke that I'm a princess in exile. I expect my background is very different from most other people's, not just among the autistic community, but among the population at large. So let me paint the picture for you. My father was Boston Brahmin, Eastern Establishment, 10th generation American descended from Puritan settlers of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. President of a bank, back in the days when most banks were relatively self-contained, independent entities. They weren't the massive, faceless behemoths they are now. They were more like today's credit unions. Straight arrow as they come. Conservative in the old school sense of the word that barely even exists anymore. Dyed-in-the-wool country club Republican. Pillar of his community, not a whiff of scandal ever touched him his entire life. Integrity could have been his middle name. If he was old money, my mother was nouveau riche, with all the naked ambition that goes with it. Think Portia Featherington from the Bridgerton series. She grew up in the Irish working class enclave of Boston, very insular community. But when she was 5 years old, something happened that set her path for life. December 1936 was when Edward VIII abdicated his throne so he could marry a twice-divorced Baltimore socialite. Terrible scandal, headline news all around the world. The Christmas carol on everyone's lips that year was, "Hark the herald angels sing, Mrs. Simpson's pinched our king." From that day forward, she was obsessed with royalty. That was her special interest. How could the poor daughter of a Boston policeman become an American aristocrat? What would it take? She was supposed to marry a nice Catholic boy like everybody else did in her neighborhood, but she would have none of it. She learned everything she could about high fashion, high culture, table manners, hostessing, so that she could qualify herself, holding out for the best man Boston had to offer. And by gods, she found him. Who cares that he was twice her age and a widower with 3 children already? She married up, moved to an upper-middle-class suburb, and achieved the absolute pinnacle of success for a 1950s woman, marriage to a rich man. If you've ever watched Mad Men, you might have noticed how a housewife married to a well-off husband had more social status than a working girl. But once she'd accomplished this, she had to make absolutely damn sure nothing could screw it up. Our moderator is fond of saying that some of the most ableist people on the planet are undiagnosed autists. That was my mother. Her deeply internalized ableism made even worse by delusions of grande dame. The bar to achieve that ineffable aura of respectability was excessively high, higher than it needed to be. Very rigid, fussy, and formal notions of the correct and proper way of doing things, as if we were supposed to be the royal family. Not only were my half-siblings and I forbidden to use swear words, we couldn't even use colloquialisms like ain't. We weren't allowed to go barefoot even inside the house, and she wouldn't let any of us be caught dead wearing torn or mended or second-hand clothes or jeans. Appearances, reputation, behavior was everything. Because what will other people think? Any impulse toward stimming, she kept an iron grip on it, releasing any tension through smoking and drinking instead. Back in the days when smoking bans didn't exist, those were the only socially acceptable stims. Now, take an autistic daughter, plop her down in the middle of all of this, and what do you get? The cost of making social gaffes, which autists are prone to doing, becomes exponentially higher than it already is. It's more than just a matter of being thought weird or offending people accidentally. In high society, the slightest putting a foot wrong can cause an international incident, or at the very least, completely torpedo your chances of finding a rich husband. Think I'm exaggerating? That's how my mother made it sound. When you're at a black tie event or cocktail party, your job as a rich man's wife is to make your husband look good. Do not embarrass him. Any accomplishments you might have in your own right are secondary at best or completely ignored. Back then, that was the price a socialite paid in exchange for financial security. All of those mandatory niceties, the poise and prim reserve a debutante is supposed to have, just seemed so pointless, so insincere, so fake. They left no room for autistic joy or self-expression. I couldn't make myself do them, even though I knew better. I was born to it, yet I felt awkwardly out of place. It was as fundamentalist an upbringing in its way as having strictly religious parents would have been. High finance was my father's religion. Social status, my mother's religion, for all intents and purposes. I was being groomed to be a Park Avenue princess from day one. With my pedigree, taking my rightful place among the Eastern establishment should have just happened automatically. Or so my mother assumed. But I wasn't consciously aware of this at the time. I expect most children, autistic or not, grow up pretty much clueless about their parents' unspoken assumptions, the hidden agendas of how the parents hope and expect the children will turn out. The environment just is what it is, and you're not yet capable of imagining how it could be or should be any different. Until the child does something that goes completely against the parents' values, and then the hidden agendas come out. That's when you start seeing fathers saying to their sons, "I'd rather see you dead than gay," as an example. But if your childhood's a living hell, you're still powerless and helpless. You have no recourse to change anything. It may take decades for you to plumb the depths of the forces that shaped them and therefore you. In my case, how my parents were indelibly marked by all the privations of the Great Depression of the 1930s. Now, it may sound to you as though I had a pretty cushy upbringing. I was damn lucky to be born into wealth, which should have been enough to protect me from anything. My mother thought the Tufts name alone had some magical power to make people fall all over themselves to treat us like royalty. Which might be why my parents had such a big blind spot about the vicious, cruel savagery that was happening right under their noses. Everybody in my hometown were supposed to be upper middle class. The children were supposedly nicely well-bred young ladies and gentlemen. Ha! I walked into a nest of vipers every day from the moment I set foot on the school bus until I got home at night. Back in the 1960s and 70s, autism was thought to be extremely rare and only affected boys. Neither teachers nor doctors knew how to recognize it. But bullies can spot autists faster than any therapist. I was just a little girl, too weak to protect myself. But I needed the tactical instincts of a freaking Navy SEAL just to survive school. My school days were a near constant barrage of insults punctuated by punches and kicks every chance the bullies got. And nobody would tell me why, except to say that my passion for ballet, classical music, and early cinema were hopelessly old-fashioned. But since when is that a capital crime? And who made them judge, jury, and executioner? In my frantic attempts to defend myself and prove myself better and smarter than they thought I was, they must have thought I was stuck up. There's nothing kids and rednecks hate more than somebody who acts superior to them. They're compelled to drag you down to their level or lower. I didn't want to be arrogant and snotty like my mother was. But in retrospect, I can see now how I might have unconsciously absorbed some of her haughty attitudes and mannerisms. If the bullies were right about anything, that's the one point I will concede to them. As for the teachers, grown-ups who should have known better, they turned a blind eye too, and I never got a good explanation why, leaving me utterly clueless as to how any of this was my fault. I should have been in special needs classes from the very outset, isolated from the nasties. But such things didn't exist in the 1960s and 70s. The bifurcation between my parents' class and my school class couldn't have been more stark. I was fighting for social acceptance on two very different battlefields. I may look like I've had everything in life handed to me on a silver platter. Undiagnosed autism turned that platter into a floppy paper plate. My only hope was to become successful in show business somehow. Watching the Ed Sullivan Show every Sunday night, it was obvious how loved performers are. Nobody was handing out Oscars for being the world's greatest housewife. I knew, early as age 8, that I wanted a husband who would advance my career so that I could reach my full potential, like a conductor advances an opera singer. Not consign me to the oblivion of being a mere domestic who gets to be arm candy once in a while. By gods, if I could become a world-renowned pianist, ballerina, actress, singer, something, it would prove that everybody who'd ever been mean to me were dead wrong about me. If I didn't go insane or killed myself first, or the bullies really did murder me, which was increasingly likely the closer they got to puberty and their testosterone made them even more brutally strong than they already were. As it happened, in 8th grade, one lone school counselor said to my parents, "Rosanna is being wasted in this school." That did it. Finally, my parents woke up and started working to get me the hell out of there and transfer to a private school. The goddess Minerva must have descended upon me the day I took the entrance exam, because against all odds, I aced it. From age 14 and for the next 12 years, through private school, college, and grad school, I didn't have to be hyper-vigilant for any attacks, and my talent and intellect exploded. But I realize now my scholarly success also meant my autism could stay hidden. Oh, the signs were still there, but nobody thought all that much of them. I was doing so well to all outward appearances. There was nothing wrong with me. I was doing everything right. There was every reason to presume I would have a spectacular career. But in academia, life was set up so I could function at my best. It was only after I left that relative safety that autism became a real disability again, when I somehow had to make my way in the real world, only to find myself completely out of my depth. I would be trying to do something, then I'd get a distraction and be asked to do something else, then I'd get a distraction from the distraction, and on, round and round all day long, until I lost track of whatever I'd been doing in the first place. Things would fall through the cracks and people would get mad at me.
Rosanna, do this!
Rosanna, do that!
Rosanna, do this other thing!
The Boy Scouts left the place a shambles again!
Did you order paper towels?
Every time I turn around, you're sick again!
We have a standing meeting! Why wasn't it on the calendar?
I thought it was very unprofessional!
Would you order toilet paper?
Why do you resist doing what I tell you?
Please, lady, give me some money. I swear I'll pay you back.
I can't believe nobody visited my mother in the hospital!
You're never at your desk when I need you!
Come on, Rosanna, you're not functioning well!
You liar!
How could you forget to do a spell check again? Desperately scrambling to keep up with it all, blasting my way through the never-ending to-do list before the next onslaught hit, I wondered, what in the actual fuck? How could I have had such a brilliant academic career and yet be a colossal failure at this job thing? Can you imagine, 30 years later, being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and that's not the worst thing to ever happen in your life? And of course, my mother's expectation that I would eventually marry into the social class I was born in also went mostly unmentioned while I was in college, only rearing its arrogant head again after I started dating. She thought she had trained me to not get anywhere near anybody who was lower class than us. But where were all the successful men in Baltimore? Every guy I met was poor as a church mouse. And I can see now how neurotypical men aren't attracted to me anyway, They think I'm a silly little ninny. And then, when I discovered the local pagan community when I was 25 and fully embraced myself as the nature mystic I had always been, well, unlike other so-called Christian parents, mine didn't think I'd gone to the devil. It wasn't the theology that bothered them. It was the fact that bohemian pagans would never be able to advance me socially. You're known by the company you keep. Well, I'm sorry, but the nature mystics were the only people who understood me on every level. When you're autistic, that's the most precious thing in the world. I married 2 of them, not realizing in my 30s and 40s that both of my now ex-husbands were probably autistic too. The first descended into alcoholism, the second into get-rich-quick schemes. Propping them up, having to be the responsible one and somehow hold our lives together, when my own disability made that far beyond my capacity to handle, cost me dearly, both in money and emotional strength. So now, 64 years on, both my parents gone, so I don't have to live up to that pressure anymore. The overarching theme that has emerged is an underemployed overachiever, starting with my singing voice as the one and only thing I had going for me, at least at first, and then building on more and more clever technical skills, some of them by accident, many of them self-taught, including the ability to design my own clothes, and becoming powerful as a writer and public speaker, which I am now turning toward disability advocacy. If I could be said to be typical in any way, I am a typical neurodivergent, brimming over with talents and creativity that I could totally monetize. But I don't know how. Meanwhile, massively overconfident guys are out there making money hand over fist, while their content and talent are mediocre at best, poisonous at worst. Looking at you, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate. But I'm doing the best I can, putting great content out onto the interwebs, hoping that at long last somebody will see it, a genuine mentor who will be willing to take me on. Because that's what I've needed all along in a partner. Not for me to be his support, but for him to be mine, personally and professionally. And now that I know I'm navigating the world through autistic lenses, I hope I can be a much better advocate for myself than I have been thus far. That, of course, will be an ongoing process. But I figure if I can advocate for other disabled people, it'll make it easier for me. I have noticed that I now seem to rub people the wrong way less often. And it's not because I finally mastered masking. It's because I'm being more gracious with myself. Funny what a little self-acceptance can do. So now, you know that there's more to me than the pretty outfits I wear. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
They treated me like I was one of them, even though my wheelchair existed, even though my canes existed. And what really surprised me was their reaction because I was a member of the student council when I was in junior high school. And the teacher forgot to order dance tickets for a dance that we were having that was happening in just a couple days. And here I am in a student council meeting, and I'm sitting there thinking, because my dad had a friend who owned a printing shop, and I told her when they announced this at the meeting, I said, I got a solution. Can I go make a phone call? I made a phone call, got a hold of a friend of my dad's, and 3 hours later, I had the tickets in my hand.
Yay!
And then I went into school the next morning with 300 tickets in a bag in my hand, and I went into the student council president's office, or in his classroom, and I said to a teacher liaison that I needed to see him. And then I walked over to his twin brother's office, classroom with him. And then he came out, and they looked at me and said, "What's up, Marlene?" And I said, "Hold out your hand." And they looked at me, I said, "Just hold out your hand." And I took out 3 packs of tickets, 100 each, and I put them in each of their hands. And they looked at them, and they said, "Boy, these were professional." They looked at me, and they said, "How much is it costing me?" And I put my hand up with a 0. And they were like,
What?
So in spite of my physical limitations, in spite of being somebody with limits, they got to see that I am just like them. And they treated me like them. And they were really surprised that I came through in a pinch.
Yeah.
They were
Awesome.
really, really shocked.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, not.
You got some respect after that, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I remember at my end of my 9th grade year at that school, when they were giving out awards, I got an award for being on the student council, and I was getting ready to walk up there, and the president of the student council walked to me. I said, I could have walked over there. He said, "Marlene, okay, I'll walk to you." But after that, people got to see that I'm just like them. I may have to do things differently, but I am just like everybody else.
All right, good for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Marlene. And we have 3 more hands up. I'll go to Tracy, and then Alex, and then Eugenia, and then I'll turn it on over to Cody, because we want to make sure to get a few minutes in for Cody too. So go ahead, Trace.
Just was curious, Rosanna. Do you feel your son experienced any negative feedback from people because you were different at the time? You didn't know about your diagnosis. But I'm a mom, and I feel like sometimes my kids get treated differently because I am a person with a disability.
I don't believe my son really experienced that kind of torment by proxy, if you will, but because I always tried to be the cool mom, and I would throw great kids parties, which helps.
And I could see that in all your personality, that those things would be something you would excel at.
Yes, well, also when my son went to the Carver Center for the Arts and Technology, which is one of the magnet schools, I would talk to some of the other students in his grade and talk to them about their singing performances, and giving them ideas about roles that they could play in musical theater. Because I would listen, I'd play a little game with myself. I would listen to what they were doing and see what other things I could see them doing. So I'd say, that one could play Porgy in another few years. This one could play Rafiki right now. This one I could see as the Duchess in The Marriage of Figaro, and so on.
Cool. I'll go to Alex and then Eugenia.
I think the word "wow" alone just sums it right up. Going back to when you were, did you ever express how the bullying affected you and stuff?
Oh yeah, I mean, did you miss that part, or did you come in late?
I think I think I missed that part.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I did talk about that at some length.
I was about to say because I've done that myself. I'm still in the process of doing that, and if there's anything I have since learned, and I think this is pretty much advice for everybody. I'm not playing favorites, but I will say this I know for a fact, and I'm speaking from experience too. Keeping things bottled up for a long enough period of time, it still is, and even now, to this day, remains very unhealthy.
Yeah.
So, Elton John said it himself. You can't stay silent. You can't say nothing. Being a fan of his, I'm in full agreement.
Yes. Yeah, and I still have complex PTSD from that, which has never really been treated all that much. And there are times when I will just get so badly triggered by listening to somebody else's experience that I'll have to take a sedative to be able to go back to be able to sleep at night, because otherwise I'll get stuck in a feedback loop. So that's something that I know I need some help with, and I'm having a hard time finding a therapist who works with adult autists, because most of them are working with children, and a lot of them are ABAers.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Alex. Eugenia, we'll go to you, and then we'll turn it on over to Cody.
I just have a couple of comments. One comment I have about myself, I think I wish they had a special needs back then, because I grew up in the 70s also, 60s to I guess 70s to 80. I graduated in 1980, but I wish they had a special needs program. Even though I did fairly very well in school, I think what helped me with my comprehension, and I wish they had that back then.
Yes.
And then I wanted to say too about I was never bullied, but I kept to myself a lot. I think they knew about it different, but everybody had their own groups, so they didn't try to include me. I guess that's the word to use. And anything social. I said maybe I had a little talk with the other students, but in school everybody had their own group and went their own way. There was only one girl in high school who was very nice, who included me. She invited me over to sleep, but she was the only one.
Yeah.
But I guess she just knew that I was a nice person, but didn't base it on whether or not I was popular or all the stuff that goes along with it. But I just wasn't really included in anything social.
Yeah, I was kind of a loner myself, and I think contributing to some of my aura of strangeness was that I barely seemed to engage with this world, but would be wandering through life in a self-absorbed dream state half the time, trying to imagine what that must have looked like to anybody else looking at me from the outside. It was what the Irish would call being away with the fairies.
I did the same thing. I was in a dream world. I guess that helped me cope with, I guess, what was going on with me.
Yeah, for real though, coping mechanism is our real thing. When we have to interact with worlds that aren't built for us, we have to do things to cope, and that's one of the things that we do sometimes, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you again so much, Rosanna. It was a phenomenal pleasure, and I hope that you saw all the compliments that you got in the chat as well.
Yes. Oh, yes, I did.
Yeah.
I did see that. I kind of wasn't looking at them as we were going along.
Yeah, that was really great. Take a look at Rosanna's YouTube video as well. another really great resource for people who want to learn more about themselves and autism. Thank you again, Rosanna.
Yes, that's a 6-episode series, and it's called Was It Autism All Along?
Fantastic.
Very cool. And